I didn't notice her at first, not the way I would later. To me, she was just the neighbor, the woman who had recently moved back into the quiet house at the end of the lane after her divorce. She was older than me, maybe 20 years or so, but she carried herself with the kind of presence that made you straighten your posture without even realizing it. There was a grace to her, polished yet relaxed, as though she'd lived through storms and learned to let them wash past without knocking her down. The first real conversation we had was a simple one, born from convenience. I'd been bringing groceries up the steps to my place when she appeared, leaning casually against her porch railing, watching the street as if it were a private stage. She smiled when our eyes met. Easy, natural, a smile that carried no effort but left an impact. We exchanged a few words, small things at first. She asked where I worked, teased me about my poor balance when I nearly dropped a bag of oranges. I admitted I wasn't much of a cook, and she arched an eyebrow like she'd already expected as much. Her voice was warm but edged with wit, and I found myself laughing more than I meant to. Then it happened, so quickly I almost thought I misheard. She leaned just slightly on the railing, tilting her head in mock seriousness, and said, "One night with me, and you'll never forget." The words hung in the warm air, carried on the hush of cicadas and the fading light of dusk. My first instinct was to laugh. It was a joke, of course. Her tone made that clear. Playful, light, like she was tossing me a line just to see if I'd flinch. I chuckled, shaking my head, muttering something about her having too much confidence for her own good. But inside, the tease struck deeper than I expected. It wasn't the words alone. It was the way her lips curved when she said them, the slight narrowing of her eyes as though she was challenging me to take her seriously. She had that air about her, confident enough to make you wonder if she was playing or revealing something true. I walked away eventually, groceries in hand, telling myself it was nothing, just neighborly banter, just her way of breaking the ice. And yet, later that night, as I unpacked the groceries in the quiet of my kitchen, I caught myself hearing her voice again, replaying the words as though they were meant for more than a laugh. "One night with me, and you'll never forget." It was the kind of line you could dismiss in the moment, but not the kind you could easily forget. And as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling with the window cracked open to the warm summer night, I realized something had shifted. She was no longer just a neighbor. She had become a presence, one I wasn't sure I was ready for, but one I knew I couldn't ignore. After that night, I began to notice her more. Not because she demanded attention, she didn't need to, but because she had a way of filling the spaces around her. Even in silence, she left traces. The sound of her wind chimes carried through the evening air, her laughter sometimes drifting from her porch when she spoke on the phone, her garden blooming more beautifully each week under her care. It wasn't the kind of noticing that came from infatuation. It was subtler than that, almost reluctant. My eyes found her before my mind caught up, as though my body already knew she mattered in ways I wasn't ready to admit. I'd see her crouched in her garden, hair slipping loose from the clip that tried to hold it back, sunlight brushing her shoulders in soft gold. Sometimes, through her kitchen window, she'd be cooking with slow, deliberate motions, humming to music I couldn't quite make out. She wasn't performing for anyone. She simply was, and that was enough to draw me in. Our small encounters continued, each one more disarming than the last. One afternoon, I came back from work carrying a heavy box of supplies. She appeared suddenly, leaning in her doorway, one eyebrow lifted with that same playful tilt. "You'll throw your back out before you even hit 30, she teased. Before I could protest, she stepped closer, brushing the dust off my sleeve with her hand. It was nothing, just a neighborly gesture, casual, fleeting, but the touch lingered. The warmth of her fingers stayed even after she pulled away, leaving me standing there, unreasonably aware of my own heartbeat. Another evening, she offered me a glass of lemonade when I passed by her porch. The rim of the glass was cold against my skin, but her fingertips brushed mine as she handed it over, a brief spark hidden in the ordinary. Her gaze held mine for a second too long, calm but unreadable. And it was then that I realized the truth. Her presence carried a weight. She wasn't like the women my age, rushing through conversations, skimming the surface. With her, even silence had depth. She spoke with pauses, with glances, with the subtle way she leaned in closer or tilted her head. There were moments I found myself caught between two currents. The part of me that admired her from a respectful distance, and the part of me that felt pulled into something deeper, something I couldn't quite define. At night, when the neighborhood settled and the cicadas began their steady hum, I'd think about the way her voice softened at the edges of a laugh, or how her perfume seemed to linger in the air long after she'd gone back inside. It was innocent, wasn't it? Just neighborly exchanges, polite kindnesses, small touches. That's what I told myself. But deep down, I knew better. There was something in the air between us, quiet, invisible but undeniable. A thread I couldn't stop noticing, tightening slowly, pulling me closer every time our paths crossed. It was a Tuesday evening when I found her sitting outside alone. The air was warm but not heavy, the kind of summer night that carried a softness in its silence. I had just come back from a late shift, tired, my shirt sticking faintly to my back. Her porch light was on, though dim, casting her in a soft golden frame. She sat barefoot on the steps, a half-finished glass of wine resting beside her, her arms loosely wrapped around her knees. For once, she didn't notice me right away. She was gazing upward, eyes fixed on the dark stretch of sky, as if searching for something beyond the scattered stars. When she finally turned, there was no teasing smile, no arched brow, just a tired curve at the corner of her lips. "You're up late," I said, breaking the quiet as I walked closer. "Couldn't sleep," she replied. Her voice was low, unguarded. I sat a step below her, careful not to intrude, letting the silence settle again before speaking. "Long day." She gave a soft laugh, one without humor, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Long few years." That was the first time she mentioned it directly, her divorce. Until then, it had only existed in passing remarks from neighbors, whispers of sympathy I never indulged. But here, in the stillness of night, she began to unravel pieces of it herself. She told me it hadn't ended in some dramatic explosion of betrayal. No screaming, no broken dishes, no infidelity. Just silence. A marriage that had slowly emptied until the love became something unrecognizable. "It's strange," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the wine glass at her feet. "Losing someone not because they hurt you, but because they stopped seeing you." I didn't interrupt. I just listened. And maybe that was what she needed, someone who didn't rush to fill the silence with advice or pity. Her voice wavered only once, when she admitted she'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly looked at, noticed beyond routine or expectation. She blinked quickly after saying it, as though embarrassed by her own vulnerability. Without thinking, I reached out, just a small gesture, a grounding one, and placed my hand near hers on the step. Not touching at first, just close enough that she could choose. Slowly, she let her hand slide over mine, resting it there. Her palm was warm, steady. For a moment, the weight of her touch seemed to anchor her, and me along with it. "Thank you," she whispered, glancing at me with eyes that held both gratitude and something more fragile. Hope? Maybe, or the fear of it. The moment lasted only a breath. She pulled back lightly, collecting herself, tucking her knees back to her chest. But something had shifted. That night, as I walked back to my apartment, I realized the woman who once seemed untouchable in her confidence had let me see a fracture in her armor. And the truth was, that glimpse made her all the more captivating. Not for her beauty, not for her wit, but for her humanness, for the way strength and vulnerability could exist in her at once. And I knew then, this was no longer just a neighborly connection. It was becoming something deeper, something neither of us had yet named. A few days later, she called out to me from her porch as I was unlocking my door. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, holding up a light bulb in one hand and pointing toward the fixture above her entryway. It wasn't unusual. Neighbors asked neighbors for help. But something about the way her voice softened, the way her eyes met mine and lingered, made the air between us shift again. Inside, her house smelled faintly of lavender and clean linen, the kind of scent that settles into your skin if you stay too long. She handed me the bulb, thanking me with a half smile, then fetched a small ladder. "You're taller," she said with mock seriousness, "so you get the honor." I climbed up, unscrewing the old bulb. She steadied the ladder beneath me, her hands wrapped around the sides. I could feel her presence below me, not just the steadiness of her grip, but her gaze. The silence was thick, almost humming, as if the simple act of changing a bulb had become something else entirely. When I stepped down, we laughed at how ridiculous it was to make a production out of something so small. But in that laughter, our shoulders brushed, and neither of us moved away. Later, she asked if I could help her shift a chair in the living room. It was heavier than it looked, the kind that had probably been there for years. As we lifted it together, our hands overlapped on the wooden arm. Her fingers lingered, not pulling back immediately, and when she finally did, her smile was softer than I'd ever seen it. "You're careful with me," she said quietly, almost as if the words weren't meant to escape her lips. Her eyes held mine, searching. I like that. The truth was I was careful, not out of hesitation, but out of reverence. She wasn't someone to rush with easy charm or thoughtless words. She deserved presence, patience, and I felt that in every moment with her. Afterward, we ended up sitting on her couch, side by side, catching our breath from moving furniture that probably didn't need to be moved in the first place. The radio played softly from another room, some old tune neither of us recognized. For a while, we didn't speak. She leaned back, her arm resting casually along the back of the couch, and I could feel the warmth of her shoulder brushing against mine. It was a closeness that didn't demand anything, yet suggested everything. When she turned to look at me, the playful spark returned, but it was gentler now, threaded with something unspoken. "You know," she teased, "for someone your age, you're remarkably patient." I laughed, though my heart was pounding. "Maybe it's just you," I said before I could stop myself. Her eyes softened at that, and she looked away with a faint smile, as though she didn't want me to see how much the words affected her. It was just a light bulb, just a chair, just a couch. And yet, by the time I left her house that evening, I knew it was more. The space between us wasn't empty anymore. It was alive, charged, a quiet dance pulling us closer, step by step. The storm came suddenly, rolling in with a low rumble that shook the windows and sent the street into shadows. By the time the rain began to fall, thick and steady against the glass, I was already at her doorstep. She had waved me over when the first drop started, insisting I shouldn't walk home in the downpour. Inside, the world felt smaller, cocooned against the storm. Her living room was dim, except for a lamp in the corner, its glow spilling across the walls like amber silk. She handed me a towel for my hair, then disappeared into the kitchen. The sound of clinking cups and the hiss of the kettle filled the silence, grounding and domestic in a way that felt almost intimate. When she returned, she carried 2 steaming mugs of tea. She set one in front of me and settled onto the couch beside me, pulling her legs up beneath her. The blanket draped across her shoulders slipped a little, and she tugged it back into place with an absent-minded grace. We talked at first about small things, the storm, work, the absurdity of how much furniture she always seemed to need moved. But slowly, the conversation deepened. Maybe it was the storm, maybe the way the rain blurred out the rest of the world, but words seemed to come easier. I told her about my restlessness, about how I sometimes felt like I was standing on the edge of my own life, waiting for it to begin. She listened, chin resting lightly on her hand, her eyes steady, as if every word I spoke mattered more than I believed. It was her turn. She spoke of regrets, not dramatic ones, but quieter, heavier things. "I don't miss him," she admitted softly, referring to her ex-husband. "I miss the idea of being chosen, of being someone's first thought." Her words landed between us like a confession, fragile and raw. I wanted to reach for her hand, but instead, I let the silence honor what she just said. She noticed my hesitation. She always did. And with a faint smile, she leaned closer, brushing her fingers over mine as she set her mug on the table. The touch was feather-light, but deliberate. "Sometimes," she whispered, "you make me feel like I still matter." The room shifted then, charged with something unspoken. Our eyes met, and the air between us felt impossibly small. My chest tightened with the pull to lean closer, to bridge the space and find out what waited on the other side of the silence. But I didn't move. My hand remained still beneath hers, my breath caught in the weight of the moment. Fear held me back. Not fear of her, but fear of breaking what we had by rushing it. She must have felt it, because her lips curved into the faintest smile, half knowing, half tender. She withdrew her hand slowly, her eyes lingering on mine, as if to say she understood. The storm raged outside, but inside, it was only the two of us, sitting side by side with words unsaid, hearts heavy with what might be. And though nothing happened that night, no kiss, no confession, the unspoken between us was louder than any thunder outside. The storm had passed, but something lingered from that night. The weight of the silence between us, the brush of her hand against mine, the words she almost seemed afraid to say. For days afterward, we carried on as if nothing had shifted. Our greetings remained light, our conversations easy. But beneath the surface, something pressed forward, insistent, unrelenting. Then one evening, she invited me over for dinner. There was no excuse of errands this time. No storm, no broken light bulb. Just her voice calling across the yard, warm and deliberate. "Come eat with me tonight." I made too much. Her house smelled of roasted herbs and something sweet cooling on the counter. The table was set simply but thoughtfully, candles flickering, music humming softly in the background. It wasn't extravagant, but it was more than casual. It felt like intention. We ate, we laughed, we teased each other in that rhythm we'd fallen into so naturally. But underneath it, there was a softness I hadn't felt before, a quiet attention in the way she looked at me when I spoke, the way her laughter lingered, the way her knee brushed against mine under the table and didn't move away. At one point, her hand reached across the table, fingers lightly wrapping around mine. Her touch was warm, steady, deliberate. She didn't say anything at first, just traced her thumb gently over the back of my hand, as though testing whether I'd pull away. I didn't. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, almost cautious. "You remember that first night? Why, I teased you." I smiled, though my chest tightened at the memory. Hard to forget. Her eyes flickered, serious now, her fingers tightening around mine. I wasn't just joking. The air shifted. Her gaze held mine, searching, vulnerable in a way I had rarely seen from her. "You're younger," she said quietly, "and maybe you don't understand what it means for me. To feel something again. To want someone again." She hesitated, swallowing, her words trembling at the edges. "It scares me, because you could be a moment and I don't think I could bear being just a moment in someone's life anymore." I didn't answer right away. The honesty in her voice demanded more than quick reassurance. It demanded truth. So I leaned in slightly, my hand closing over hers, firm and steady. "You're not a moment to me," I said softly. "You're the only thing that feels real right now." Her breath caught. For a second, I thought she might laugh or brush it off with a joke, but she didn't. She looked down at our hands, her lips pressing into a faint, trembling smile. "That's exactly what scares me," she whispered. We sat there, the candles flickering low, the space between us alive with both fear and longing. She hadn't pushed me away. I hadn't let go of her hand. And though nothing more happened that night, I knew we had crossed a line we could never step back from. The tease that began as a joke had become something real, something fragile, something that could break us both or change us forever. The morning after our dinner, the neighborhood was alive with early light. The rain from a storm had washed the streets clean, leaving everything sharp and bright. I had barely poured my first cup of coffee when I saw her struggling with a box on her porch, something large, awkward, half hanging from her arms as if it weighed more than she wanted to admit. Without thinking, I set my mug down and walked over. "Need a hand?" I asked. She looked up, hair falling loose around her face, and for a moment I caught a flash of that familiar teasing smile. But this time it softened quickly into something else, something gentler. She nodded. "Always." Together we carried the box inside. It wasn't heavy once we shared the weight, but it brought us close again, our steps falling into sync, shoulders brushing as we set it down by the wall. When we finished, we stood there for a moment, breath caught, not from effort, but from the quiet awareness that filled the room. She turned to me, her hands brushing dust from her palms. For a heartbeat, it felt like she might retreat into humor, into that armor of which she wore so well. But instead, she stepped closer, slowly, as if testing the ground between us. Her forehead came to rest lightly against my chest. I froze, not from discomfort, but from the shock of how natural it felt. Her arms slipped around my waist, her embrace slow, deliberate, carrying a weight that was more than simple affection. I held her carefully, my arms encircling her, and in that stillness, I felt her heartbeat steady against mine. It wasn't a desperate embrace. It wasn't rushed. It was grounding, as if both of us had been waiting too long to admit what we wanted. Not a fleeting spark, but something lasting. When she finally pulled back, her hand lingered against my cheek. Her eyes searched mine, vulnerable but steady. "Maybe I was right that night," she whispered, a faint smile curving her lips. One night with me would be unforgettable. Her thumb traced lightly along my jaw, and her smile softened further. But I think I'd rather remember all the mornings after. Something in me loosened then, the hesitation, the fear of overstepping. Because in that moment, I knew this wasn't about a tease anymore. It wasn't about age or appearances or what the neighbors might think. It was about her and me, and the quiet way our lives had begun to weave together without either of us planning it. We ended up on her porch that morning, sipping coffee side by side as the sun climbed higher. The world around us stirred awake. Birds in the trees, the distant hum of traffic, a lawnmower starting up down the street. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life. And yet, sitting there with her shoulder pressed to mine, the steam rising from our mugs, it felt extraordinary. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. That was the morning I stopped thinking of her as just my neighbor. She was my beginning.